sharing my screen?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do that.
Okay. All right. So I've got some slides here to share with you. And sometimes things don't always work out exactly how I want them to on Zoom. So if I'm talking about something that doesn't seem like it, what you're seeing, please let me know. So just to make sure my slides are working, you see reporting with Google Data Studio. My slides are working?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for the visual feedback on this. Okay, so I already talked about me. That's probably the least important part of this presentation. So I've got three main points that I want to cover in this talk today, and I don't know exactly how fast I'll get through all these slides, but here are some of the main points. The first one is selecting the right tools for the right job. So I'm not here as a Google Data Studio evangelist, convincing you that this tool is going to solve your data problems. I really want to help you think about whether or not this is a tool that's going to be useful for solving certain types of problems. With this, I want to also talk with you about this concept that I like working with in community organizations about creating sustainable centralized data pipelines. And I think this is important because a lot of organizations just spend a lot of time and resources on repetitive tasks where they're continually working with the data over and over. As new data come in, they have to reanalyze everything. So I think that helping think about a concept of pipelines is very useful. And then talking about how Google Data Studio is an excellent but imperfect solution to some of these problems. So those are the things that I hope to cover today. I'm going to do a short demonstration. I get reluctant because sometimes software doesn't work out in live demonstrations, but I'm determined to give it my best shot. But it's not really a tutorial. It's more of an orientation to help figure out if this is a tool that you want, and then getting you on a learning path that could be useful for adopting this in your day-to-day work. So the first thing that I always want to focus on when we're working with data is trying to figure out what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So it's not about that you've got a new software option and then once you adopt it, then your problems are going to go away, but really trying to think about what are the sort of the pain points that you or your organizations deal with. And the number one pain point that I experience when I go into organizations is just the difficulty of managing diverse data sources. So a lot of things are just saved in different places, and it takes a lot of work to get everything prepared and put together into some type of report. And then once that is done, we start the whole process over again. So I want to help you think about, the right tools for the right job. And when we work from this, when we take this framework, then we can figure out, is Google Data Studio something that could be useful for the problems that you're experiencing, or even creating data products? So I think that Google Data Studio has a lot of strengths, but it's not a panacea because software is really just a tool for working with our data. So it's not the tool itself that's going to solve the problems, but how we actually put the tool into practice. Okay, so the ROI of Google Data Studio. So I work with a lot of different types of software visualization tools. So I work with Google Data Studio, I work with Tableau, code-based solutions, including R and Python. And so all of them have very specific use cases, and it's matching those for the right job. And so the return on your investment for Google Data Studio, I think it works great if you're talking about centralizing diverse streams of data. So in an organization, you might have data that's coming in. People are working in, say, Google Forms and Google Sheets that's collecting survey data. You might have financial data. You could have a donor database. And so you have all these different streams of data. And what happens is a lot of people just continue to go in the data and they get out of the data. And so they're continually working with and trying to process the data. What this Google Data Studio offers is a way to sort of centralize a lot of these processes where you connect to these different data sources. And so that's the point that I'm going to emphasize in the value of this tool for the work that you do. The other benefit of Data Studio that's not possible with, say, like Tableau, is that it has really good collaborative features where you can work collaboratively on developing a report and then serving these interactive real-time reports. And so when I talk about real-time, that Data Studio is a tool that will continually go out into your data sources that you have connected to. And when there's new data there, it will pull it back into your dashboard. So allowing everything to be refreshed in real time. Well, not real time, but I think you get down into every 15 minutes or so. But I mean, real time for enough for the work that we do. So let's talk more specifically about Google Data Studio. And I'm going to, about the features of it. And I'm going to try to hit on all the points, recognize it's a great tool. There's some things that are quirky about it. And then there's just some things that are just a big headache that you should be aware of. But these are just things for you to consider as you are deciding whether or not that this is something you want to invest in learning. Okay, so just very briefly, Google Data Studio is part of Google's ecosystem of free tools. That means that if you've got a Google account, you've got free access to Google Data Studio, which is really impressive because it's a powerful system that can handle everything from small data sets and spreadsheets to the world's largest data sets in Google BigQuery, because it's got so many different data connectors. And so the fact that it's free and it's very widely accessible makes it a great option for community organizations that don't have much money but would like to enrich their own technology ecosystem. Data Studio is easy to learn if you've got a strong grasp of working with spreadsheets, especially if you have a good understanding of how to prepare data and say use pivot tables, then you're perfectly ready for diving into Google Data Studio. And the reality is data visualization is building the visualizations is not difficult. All of the work, which I continually say to all my students, all of the work is in data preparation. And so I cannot overemphasize that point enough, that all of the real work in data visualization and building dashboards is in data preparation. So Data Studio has all the essential graphics and features for creating administrative reports. It doesn't allow high-level customization, say like with Tableau or a code-based solution, but it's got all the basics. And I think if you're looking to get the job done and present your work in a high-quality manner, this is a great tool. And again, collaboration. It's always, we're going to be collaborating on a lot of reports. And what's nice is you don't have to send files around. And so it has the same type of share capabilities and interface as Google Docs and Google Sheets. So that's the quick overview of Google Data Studio, but let me be more specific about the problem that it's solving for me in my work and how I think it could be of value to you. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about sustainable data pipelines. Within an organization, we often have data coming in from many different sources I've talked about. You might have Google Forms that feed into Google Sheets. You might have Excel data sources. This is Google Analytics. So if you're doing website development, we've got another data stream there. A SQL database, this could be, you might have a donor database. You could have, obviously, could be QuickBooks or something in more of a database format. People are adopting Airtable as well, which is a relational database. And so we have all of these different streams of data. And when we work with the data in community organizations, it's very, very time consuming to continually go into each unique data source and trying to put everything together and doing that manually. And so what I like to do is I like to try to think of and identify the tools that's going to automate those processes. So I like to work with data a lot, but one of my goals is to get people to not work with data, because part of the human intervention with data is people make errors, and then we should try to minimize the time of processing it. What I want people to do is I want them to think about the meaning and the value and the information you could extract from the data, which is more at this end, that once we get all this data feeding into the data visualization tools, it frees people's minds where they're not trying to manage this data, so they can think more creatively about what are the insights that the data offer. And so it's shifting a lot of this front end work and freeing up time to allow the end users to maximize the value of data. And what we want to do is we want to think of how do we make this sustainable. So once we make these data connections, that we feed everything from these connections and it reads it in real time. So all the data is continually updating our dashboards, where we're not thinking about, doing analyses over and over again. So if we've got another wave of survey data, that we just don't go back into the raw data, reanalyze it, and present it. So that's the idea of the data pipeline. So when I talk about Google Data Studio, it's not about building fancy looking data visualizations. It's really solving this very practical problem. Here's another example of what I mean by centralizing streams of data. So I worked with one community organization that does a lot of events, a lot of educational events. And so they had a challenge of saving all their digital assets from the events. They got the recordings, they've got the PowerPoint slides, they've got meeting lists, they've got pre and post surveys, they've got dates of the events. And so this very simple activity actually was a very complex data problem, because they had so many different data sources all over the place. And what we've really tried to do is just try to centralize it using that approach of how do we connect all of these data systems just to get it to feed into one centralized place where we could have this automated reporting system at the front end. So we're just looking at, so all of these procedures are just feeding data into the centralized place and updating the dashboards. And this allows people just to focus on the reporting, and it saves a lot of time. And so part of the challenge is helping organizations understand sort of the return on their investment for adopting a tool like this, because they often don't see there's more efficient and effective solutions to a lot of their problems. So let's take a look at what some of these visualizations look like. So here's a link what I'm going to just go to right now. And I think I need to stop sharing and resharing my screen. You don't see, I'm guessing you don't see my visual. Do you see a Data Studio visualization or my slides? I see hand wavings, but I'm not sure.
We see a visualization.
Okay,
Welcome
great.
to Data Studio.
Okay, great. So this is what a report looks like. So this is a tutorial in Data Studio that is created and offered in the template section of Google Data Studio. But this looks like a report that is already created, and it's shareable. So just some of the features of it that we could take a look at is that you can create an interactive report with many different charts, many different slides. So you could think of, rather than a single page, we've got an interactive place where we can have multiple different charts and images to create something that's more visually appealing, and gives the end user the information that they need. So there's all different types of charts that we can have. Here is, and with a lot of the templates too, these are template-based approaches. And so this is an example where if you have working with an organization, many organizations pay another company to do their web analytics. And what's nice about Data Studio is it just connects directly with Google Analytics, and you could tie in these pre-built visualizations and save the organization a lot of money rather than having them pay for it. So I did this just recently with an organization, but using their YouTube analytics. So we're building out a new resource center for them, and it's very easy just to collect everything very quickly, to grab a link and to make these connections. And so there's so many very good demonstrations on how to do this online. Let me see if this, maybe I didn't get the right one here. Okay, so just a few things. When you go to the landing page, which we'll go to in just a moment, so I'll show it to you. There's two very important parts of Data Studio that you're going to want to pay attention to when you're diving into using it. You have the report, and then you have a data source. So when you create a Google Data Studio visualization, you start with a report, and it's an empty report. So you think of it as just like it's just like an empty slide deck that you're working with. And the report, you have to connect to data sources. And so that's the value of it. So one report can have many different data sources, and that's where we're talking about the centralization of the analyses. So so I can connect to a local file on my computer with Data Studio through a connector. I could also connect to files that are online and say Google Sheets or analytics, and I could bring all of those together. So one single report can have many different data connections. So these are the main two that you're going to want to pay attention to. And it looks exactly the same as sort of the interface of Google Drive. And so I've got, so this is the landing page. And these are some templates that pop up right away. And so this is the tutorial report that I just demonstrated that will always be there for you. So if you log into Google Data Studio and you go to the tutorial report, that's a great place to just familiarize yourself with building it out. And then we've got a lot of different templates as well to work with. There's so you don't have to start from the ground up, but eventually you're going to want to do your own customization for the work that you're doing. So let me give a brief demonstration now, and I've got this meme up here of this cat, because whenever I do these live demonstrations, they always seem to not go exactly how you plan them, but I'll do my best to try to get us through that, any sort of technical challenge I have. My systems just never seem to work the moment Zoom is on and I'm sharing my screen, but let's see how this goes. Okay, so here's what Google's Data Studio looks like. So I'm just taking a screenshot. This is what an example of what I'm going to be building. So the problem that I'm solving. So this is when I'm talking about a problem is the state of Michigan produces. So I do research on substance abuse, and I've been doing some work on marijuana, and I was very interested in the price of marijuana in the state of Michigan. So every month, the state of Michigan releases what they call a statistical report, which is really just a bunch of tables. And it's totally useless to figure out, what are these trends over time, because they just give single tables of what happened in that one single month. But for me, what I want to do is I want to see all the data visualized over time. And so unfortunately, this isn't a way where I could build a data connector and get everything automatic into the system, but I create my own spreadsheet by going through all of the data files. And this is the most important part of the data management preparations, just putting the data together in a way that can be visualized. So you have to spend time to really understand what is the ideal structure for your data. So I did that. And so now let me go into Google Data Studio and start showing you some of the ways that we can go out. And so I'm just going to give you sort of a basic walkthrough on this. So here is the landing page that we have for Google Data Studio. I'm going to start with a blank report. And the first thing that we always do is we've got to tell Data Studio, where is our data coming from? And so we've got all of these different connectors here and there's, so you can see that it connects directly to say, YouTube Analytics, Google Analytics, but I like Google Sheets. And so I've got some, so I've got a lot of data that's already connected here. And so I'm just going to cancel this just for a moment and go back here. And this is the data sources. So this is where a lot of the data, when you make a connection, then it becomes available in Google Data Studio. So these are connected data sources. So I'm going to go to my blank report. And so what we need to do in doing this is going to add the data. And so I'm going to search for one of my data sheets. I'll go to Michigan marijuana. Let's see this one. Okay, so I'm going to add this to my data source. And it always populates with an initial table that you don't want. So the defaults of the Google Data Studio, like everything, get rid of the defaults. So I've connected it here. And so I'm just going to delete this because that's not what I want. So when you have, I've got a data source that's connected, and here are all my variables, and it shows what are called the type of data. So I know this is a date value because it's got a calendar, and 1, 2, 3 means it's numeric. If it was string data, it would have ABC. So we've got different types of data here. And so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to make a simple chart. And I pick my chart type here. And so we've got many different types of charts that we could use. And so when we click on the chart, this goes to our setup where we work with the data. And again, it gives you default stuff right away where it's looking at, here's my date dimension, and then here's my metrics. So the dimensions are what chop up your data, and the metrics are what is the measurements that we use. And so we still have to do formatting of this information. So I'm going to look at, let's look at the total sales over time. And I'm going to fix my date type because my date type is year and month. And now it also has the record counts, which that's not what I want. And so I can go to my total sales and I'll bring that over, and I'm going to get rid of my record count. So now it's created a very simple chart here of the total sales over time. And this is, and so you see it's very useful, very quick to create these, to create a chart that has some very nice styling. And I could also do it if I wanted to, say, have a bar chart. We got some different views that we can create. And this is an example where things, because this is an online system, as I'll mention, Google Data Studio can run a little bit slower than if you're working with things that are not local. Say Tableau, like Tableau, you can install locally, and then it goes really, really fast. A few things I just want to point out to you as to just get you oriented to looking at this. So this is one piece of the report. I can add more pages here, which then would allow me to build out the administrative report. So I could have a landing page here where maybe I would be putting in some text information where I could say medical marijuana. And it's very simple. And the editing is just like you would do for a slide deck. So I'll just do some basic formatting in here. Okay, so we can pretend that's a landing page. And so now we've got different chart views. And when we go to it, we've got the edit mode and we've got the view mode. So right now I'm in the editing mode, and I can edit this chart. And when I click on the chart, it brings up the data aspect of it. And then this is the styling of it. So if I wanted a different color, then I could easily change it. The bar is 2 different colors. And I could add another chart with same using either the same data, or I could add another data source if I wanted to. So I've got the one data source here, and I could just simply use go to my resources page here, manage added data sources, so I could add another one to the visualization if I wanted to. Now, what I want to emphasize is when you, so this is reading it from a Google Sheet. So I can go into the Google Sheet, add new data, and then this visualization will refresh automatically, or I could refresh it, force it right now to do it. But I think the default is that it updates once a day or a few hours a day, but you can set those permissions. But what I'm doing now is I'm just adding new data to my underlying data source, and then this visualization is continually pulling that data into here for that. So now if I want to add, say, a new chart, so maybe I want just to add a highlight table of some sort, I can just bring this over here. So now I've got another data source here. So I've got the data and the total sales over time. And so this is a highlight chart where we could see, I can expand this. So we've got different ways of visualizing the data and everything that you'd want in order of sorting and formatting these variables. It's very easy to do that within the system. But again, and the reason I'm going to say this multiple times is this is where I got sort of confused about how a data studio is working, is when you want to edit a certain chart, you have to click that chart, and then you've got the data portion of it, and then you've got this where you manage the actual data that's being presented, and then you've got the styling component of it. And so this is where you change the aesthetics of the chart. So just going through some of these features here, this is where we can add new data. We could add different charts to the data. And so when I talk about different data, that if I wanted to connect to a different data source here, I would just simply select the underlying data. So then here are the different data sources that I can incorporate. So I could bring in data from another data set that I have and use that. And so that's where we're talking about the connected and the integrated approach to working with and managing your data. The adding controls is a very useful and powerful feature where this is where you bring the interactivity to the end user. And when you build dashboards, the most important thing is the end user. You're building it for somebody's specific information needs. So don't be designing it for yourself, but think and be careful about over featureizing your data. But what you want to be thinking about, what is going to be useful for that end user. So in this case, I'm going to say, let's add a date filter, because maybe the end user wants to filter by a date. So let's see if we could filter it down to just period of time in October. So let's just look at October 2021 and go through December, and we can apply that. And so now it's very easy. So you can see how you could easily add filters to this but again, it's based on the information needs of your end user, that you don't want to be just creating these filters for that. You could also do cross filtering where you use a specific chart to drive the filter to look at other aspects of the chart. So I'm just going to make this a report level. Let me just see if this is going to work. Okay, so I made that a report level where I said, this now is going to be working on the report. So if I click on an element here, it will drive the visualization somewhere else to create that summary. And so that's sort of the idea of creating the interactivity. Some of the other controls that if we had lists of information, so if you're looking at, you wanted a breakdown by counties. If you had county information, you could have lists, check boxes. So any of the interactive features that you would see other places is exactly where, this is exactly what those elements do. These are some community visualization tools where people can build add-ons that, that allow for additional formatting and graphics. We can embed URLs into the image, and then these are just some formatting features of shapes and lines and text and images, just like you'd use for creating a Google Sheet. And then if we wanted to change our themes here, if we wanted some different styling for it, it's very easy to do. And then finally, what I'll share is the share feature. So it works exactly like sharing a Google Doc, but you do have a little more precision of what people can do in terms of the managing access. So you could limit people who could view only certain parts of the report. So maybe I wanted to create something that had sensitive information, and I only wanted that view to be available to a specific stakeholder group. So then I could tailor my permissions to give that granular level access control to the visualization. Okay, so I'm going to just finish up a few more slides here and then allow some time for some questions. Okay, so a few things just that I'd like to emphasize. So I'll give you my suggestions of what would be considered the ideal learning path if you were interested in Data Studio. The first one is just make sure your skills are solid in structuring and preparing data. I can't, again, emphasize the importance of that, because if you get the data in the right shape, meaning the first row of data are always your variable names and your columns are formatted correctly, your life will be much easier. The majority of all of my work is in this space. The visualization part of it is the fun, easy part of it, but that's sort of like at the end of the pipeline. So this is where you get the majority of your ROI. So having strong spreadsheet skills, working up to pivot tables, that's my sort of and when I teach data visualization, that's sort of the level that I get all my students before we dive into visualization software. The visualization principles and best practices. Having good, solid skills in that space is really important for creating data products that are useful and effective. A lot of people just start creating a lot of charts because the whole idea is that if you have data, you should visualize it. Well, that's not the case. Some data don't need to be visualized, or shouldn't. Other data, it depends on the type of data, but also the information that you're trying to extract from it. I recommend reading the docs. When they say read the docs, that's documentation. Google Data Studio has great documentation. So here's a quick start guide here. Definitely do that. And go to the templates page and see these visualizations that have been created and reverse engineer it. You can't break it. Just make a copy of their template and start playing around with to see how the visualizations have been constructed. And this last recommendation goes back to the structuring and preparing data. So I've become so I like to write code, but writing code can take a lot of time. So I've become a very big fan of no-code apps. And so I don't have time to present no-code apps in this presentation, but I do want to turn you on to tools like Tableau Prep and Data EQ, which are visualization environments where you, rather than writing code, use these visual blocks for cleaning and preparing data. And for me, that has saved a lot of time for rapid iteration. And then finally, let me acknowledge some of the limitations of Data Studio, just so you, I'm an evangelist of all data type tools, but I recognize the limitations. So it's, again, the right tool for the right job. Data Studio uses a template-based approach for data visualization. And that means that if you want to create, you're given, you put your data in a bar chart, you put it in a pie chart, which you shouldn't do. Pie charts are really not appropriate for many reasons. But you can make pie charts, line charts, heat maps, geo maps. But it's not like Tableau where you could develop really highly customizable data visualizations for doing some of this work. But the visualizations, I do think, are quite nice. So let me go to my administrative report here. So this was the, this wasn't the one I wanted to show. So this is the Michigan marijuana one in the viewing, and it gives you, it does provide really nice a visualization. And again, here is more in a report format where we can do this. But again, these are sort of pre-built charts, and that's the limitation, because you might want to do some really customization to get the information or the message you want, and you'll be limited in that just because that's the design of how of Google Data Studio. Google Data Studio is a web app, so it's going to be naturally slower than if you had a program that's running locally on your computer. This is this third point here. Keep this in mind. It might not make sense now, but when you connect your report in Data Studio to your data source, you can grow the data long, meaning you could add new data to it, but you can't grow it wide, meaning once you connect it, you can't add more variables. You could add more rows or individual cases, but not variables. So keep that in mind, because you'll break your report and you'll become super frustrated. And I couldn't figure out like why my reports wouldn't work. If it happens to you where you do want to add another variable, the strategy is disconnect the data, reconnect it with a new sheet, and then refresh it. So there's a workaround for it, but I want to just cue you into that. And this is where again, it's about how you structure your data. You have to have it structured in a way that you grow your data long. So if you're structuring it where you're putting dates on your columns and you grow it wide, that's going to be a mistake. There's formatting challenges. Again, it relates to the level of customization. You get minimal formatting, but again, that's also good because then it constrains the user who's developing it. So you don't get overly embedded in building out these features. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of technical resources in the space. So Data Studio is free, and so there's not like a lot of books that are being written that are available, but there's great YouTube videos on that. So so there's ways of learning it. Definitely YouTube is going to be your primary source, and then Medium is another outlet that has some good resources. So I'm going to just end my talk here and let you and have just some Q&A for people who are interested in talking further. But I also welcome everybody to connect with me if you want to follow up, talk more about your specific needs or problems you have. In case you don't know me, I love talking about data, and I could talk about data all day and all night. So don't hesitate to reach out if there's specific problems that you have. I've been writing a lot of free articles and posting them to Medium on developing data skills and working in the nonprofit sector. And so you could follow me on Medium and also LinkedIn. So those are some different ways of connecting with me, but I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any specific questions.
Thank you, Doc. If you have any question, you can unmute yourself and ask Doc, or you put it in the chat box.
Okay, so here's a question about somebody's not invested any time in Data Studio or Power BI. Is there a better option? I've always got opinions, and so this is a good question for that. And I'd also like to add one additional tool to that list, which is Tableau. So a lot of people sort of struggle, which tool should you use? Do you want to use, is it better to learn Data Studio, Tableau, or Power BI? And everything when it comes with these sort of questions is it depends. And it really depends on what your use case is. So if I'm looking at developing very specific, highly refined visualizations, custom, that not an off-the-shelf tool, I'm going to look at Tableau, or using a code-based solution that gives me that really fine control. If I'm looking at developing an administrative report, I would look at Power BI, or I would be looking at Data Studio, but that also depends on a few other issues, say licensing. If a community organization doesn't have, say, the licensing for Power BI, which is, I think, a more powerful system than Data Studio, then it becomes cost prohibitive if they don't already have it, or if it takes time to acquire it. And then the learning curve is also more significant. So you got to be thinking about, so when I work with community organizations, I want to think about sustainable practices. So if I go in and I build something for them, I want to make sure that I build it and they can't break it. And so I could create a lot of products with all of those tools and try to make it where they can't break it. But I want to also make sure they have the capacity to maintain it over time. So the cost is definitely part of the capacity. And sometimes I would want to train them to update or create a new visualization. So if I were going to be sort of doing my work where I go in, do some capacity building and leave, I'm going to be looking at Data Studio, because they're going to have the learning curve is much easier, it's free, and I could manage it. If I'm working with a large organization that has a lot of resources and they're going to be working with me over time, and they're going to be supporting my time to provide that assistance, then I'll look at a proprietary system of Power BI or Tableau. I prefer Tableau, but they all sort of work the same, that if you understand the logic of a data visualization system, it's quite easy to change and figure out how these other ones work. But the main difference between, say, Data Studio and Tableau is Data Studio likes wide data for the most part. So if you use Google Forms, everything is set up in Google Forms where it's very easy to work with it. Tableau likes long data. So you find yourself what's called pivoting your data a lot to create those solutions. So I know there's a very long response to a straightforward question. So I guess the short version is it really depends.
I'll go ahead and ask my question. Hi, Brian. This is Lori Wingate. I'm in the room. I don't know if you can see me. Hi.
Yep, I see you wave.
I am not that savvy of a data person, but my question for this is, does this or any of these other tools you mentioned have capacity for dealing with non-numeric data, non-quantitative data?
Non-quantitative data is always a challenge, and so it really depends. This is not a tool, so this is not going to be of much value if you're talking about, say, analyzing open-ended survey questions. And so, like, if that's part of the challenge that you're working with, this isn't the right tool for that. I do a lot of text-based analysis, but I do more of what's called quantitative text analysis. So I might be working with large collections of text data. And so that's an area of the data preparation skills where you can convert, if you want to visualize text data, you've got to convert the text data into numeric data. And so you've got to have strategies for doing that. And so this isn't a tool for making that conversion, but text data in this system is going to be, so the short answer is no. So it really depends on what sort of data that you're working with. But if you've got a lot of text data, then you'll be wanting to see what kind of insights can you extract from that. Can you do it if the extraction is manual, then that's one type of software problem. If you want to do it automatic at scale, meaning if you've got thousands or tens of thousands of text documents that you want to analyze, then quantitative text analysis. But until you get the data converted into a numeric format, then you can't really visualize text data.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hello, sir. This is Michael. Please, I want to find out from you, at what point do you collaborate? Is it about building the data from the various sources, or when the visualization is completed, that is at the time that you share the information? Can you build the data together? Maybe you are working in different departments, or you have different locations, and different sources of information are tripping in within the system.
So if I understand your question, you're wondering of when I sort of start to share the end product for the users. Well, what I always try to do is I'm developing the data dashboard for an end user group. And so I want to engage with those end users at the very beginning of that process to figure out what are the information needs they have and how we could use the visualizations to support those needs. So I never exclude the end user, the stakeholders from that process, because they have the content information that's relevant to the work that I'm doing. So I'm bringing my technical expertise. I've got some substantive content expertise, but I really need to know from them how to interpret the data, the relevance of what data sources, how they want to look at the data, what is interesting versus useful. Everybody always talks about, it'd be interesting to look at this. And so I need, part of my role is trying to help them figure out what is interesting versus what is useful. And so trying to narrow down from all of these different data sources, the usefulness of it. And I share the views with them throughout the whole process because I want to iterate on this. So I might, there's times where I might create 3 or 4 different views to figure out, how are you interpreting this? Is this easy? Because for me, it always makes sense in my mind because I'm drinking coffee all day, I'm working with the data, I'm really knowledgeable about it, but the end user might not know that. So it's a very interactive process, a very social process. So I never want my clients to be surprised at the end where there's the big unveiling. They will be part of it throughout the whole process. Okay, it looks like there's...
Yeah, thank you. Follow up on that. I want to also find out from you, if you are in a team building a project. So for example, maybe evaluators, those of us in the room here, we have a project that we are building together, and maybe various component of data is coming from different sources.
Yeah.
Yes. At what point do the team members will get the information, or you can share a common maybe Google account such that when the information drops in, everybody will be able to access the data from your end, not maybe the finished product.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I sort of understand your question. So I apologize if I don't get it right. So it sounds like you want to collaborate on a project. You've got many different sources of data. And so you got many different players that are working on the data. The ideal is everybody works on the same data and we create sort of like the truth data that everything is in one place. So what I do is I'll build my data pipeline. where I bring in all the data from all the different sources. So I become sort of the steward of it. So you have one person or one part of the project where you're bringing all the data together and you're writing out a single file that is read permissions only. And so I'll give all of my team members access to this one data file that has everything that's put together. Because what I don't want happening is I don't want multiple files going around being distributed that get mixed up or we make updates. And so like all of the updates, and so we'll have versioning control on the master data file. So I'm interested in creating like this truth file, the main file that becomes available to everybody, but we preserve that and we preserve the whole history of it. And so it's a lot of the time it's just like spending time of building those streams and then writing it into, and so then once it's written, I can save it and make it available in many different places. So for my projects at the university here, it'll just go onto our network drive. If I'm working with a community organization, I might write it to a Google Drive file and then just have read-only permissions on that. And then if there's any changes to the data, then we fix it in the main pipeline, but share it. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, a message from Cody is using Google Forms. Yes, the multiple responses, putting it in a single cell. I just worked on a problem to solve that, Cody, and I think I even have a video that I could send to you. But you're going to want to look at a tool that it allows you to efficiently prepare the data. So this is an example where I use Tableau Prep. And so with Tableau Prep, as it provides an environment where I could very efficiently split those cells into columns. And then I have to do what's called pivoting the data. And so I want to write an article, just a Medium article on just how do you analyze these data, because people use the Google Forms and it's super easy to put together a data collection tool. But when you get that end data, it's like, what do you do with it? And so, yes, the problem is there's not an out of the box solution that I have found for working with that. So you have to just, that's where it comes into knowing how do you prepare this oddly structured data. And but there's tools that you could use to help get you that point. But the more important part is like just being aware of what is the end structure of the data. So having the skills that when you see the data in a given shape, what do you want it to look like at the end state? So you've got to, and so that's where the knowledge of data structuring comes into play in order to use the tools effectively, because how I had structured data for Data Studio is different than how I had structured it for Tableau or possibly Power BI.
Thank you very much, Dr. Perron, for joining us today, and thank you all for your participation. Be sure to register for the next Eval Cafe, when we'll be joined by Dr. Suzanne Service. She will be presenting our most significant change story of impact, a 2-in-1 programs monitoring and outcome evaluation methods. The cafe will start at noon UST time. Hope to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.